Welcome to the Lawyerist Podcast with Sam Glover and Aaron Street. Each week, Lawyerist brings you advice and interviews to help you build a more successful law practice in today's challenging and constantly changing legal market. And now, here are Sam and Aaron.
Hi, I'm Sam Glover.
And I'm Aaron Street, and this is episode 128 of the Lawyerist Podcast, part of the Legal Talk Network. Today, we're checking in with solo lawyer and Mac Power Users podcaster Katie Floyd, who we originally talked to barely a month after she started her solo firm.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Clio Legal Practice Management Software. Clio makes running your law firm easier. Try it for free at Clio.com. That's CLIO.com.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Ruby Receptionists, and it's smart, charming receptionists who are perfect for small firms. Visit callruby.com/lawyerist to get a risk-free trial with Ruby. So this episode, we're going to try something new and check in with Katie Floyd. She was our guest in episode 89. At the time, she was barely a month into her new solo practice, and we thought we'd kind of follow up and see how things went with her or are going with her. So here's that update, then followed by a replay of the original interview.
Hi, Katie. So when we recorded your podcast, you were just a month into your solo practice and you hadn't even sent out any invoices yet, if I'm reading that transcript correctly.
I think that's right.
So you're about 8 months along now, I think, right?
That sounds right. I started in September and we're here in July.
All right. Well, my math may or may not be right, but that sounds close. So how's it going?
Things are going great. You know, I always tell people that I'm happier than I ever have been in my professional practice, but I'm also, the downside of that is I'm working harder than I ever have been before. But it's a good thing because I'm working for myself. And people around me just even notice. They just say, you're really, really happy. And I was like, well, I didn't realize that I was that much of a pain before. But something about working for yourself means you don't mind working that much harder.
That's very cool. Is there something that you feel like you've learned about solo practice that you didn't know the last time we talked?
You know, the thing that I learned, because I've really been keeping tabs on all of the numbers and things like that, and is I didn't realize that it never rains, but it pours. I have gone through times where in fact, right now, I always thought summer would be slow because we're recording this very end of June and early July. Summer has traditionally been slow for me, but I am really, really busy in my practice right now. But then I might go several days and my phone will never ring. And sometimes I'll call Ruby and be like, just checking in to make sure everything's working. And they're like, nope, it's all working. So one of the things that I've learned is that you just have to, really keep ahead, keep on top of the workload, buckle down when the busy time comes. And then when the slow time comes, enjoy them, and then maybe have a few, business building products on the back burner and go from there.
Very cool. So you are one of the Mac Power users. Your podcast, I think, probably dwarfs ours in circulation because I suppose the passionate Mac users dwarf the lawyer population, I'm assuming is why. But have you picked up any new tips along the way for running your practice that Mac users who are listening might want to know about?
Yeah, so a couple of things that I'm doing differently. The first thing is QuickBooks and I have finally learned to speak the same language.
Oh, wow.
It took a couple of months, and my accountant just kept telling me to stick with it. And she gave me some really good advice. She said, when you start your practice initially, you will have more time than money. And I was very, very tempted when I first started my practice to hire a part-time bookkeeper or, something like that, because I was very, very frustrated with QuickBooks. But I would say after about 3 months of diligently doing it myself, something in my brain flipped and I finally figured it out, and it's not that big of a deal anymore. And the way that I've got it set up now is I'm doing all of my own entry. I probably sit down once a week and reconcile everything. All of my trust accounting is in QuickBooks. All of my operating expenses and accounts are in QuickBooks. And I send, if I have a specific question, my accountant goes in and looks at it, but she basically looks at it quarterly just to make sure that there's nothing funky and that everything's on the right track and files my taxes, and that it's a pretty simple process. So one of the things that the advice that she gave me, she said, you really need to get over that initial hump and learn how to do it yourself, because when you get to the point that you have to turn that over to somebody else because you're so busy. She said, it's very important that you know how to do it because then you know how to keep an eye on it. And she says, that's how people get taken advantage of, is you don't know how to do it and you really rely on somebody else. And then you don't see what's going on and you don't recognize when something bad is happening.
I suppose the flip side is that it can be really frustrating finding a good bookkeeper when you know how you want it to be done.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But I'm glad I sucked it out. I'm glad I put the time in and ultimately figured out, because now it's not that big of a deal. The one little tip that I'll give people related to that, the mistake that I made is, there are a couple of different levels of QuickBooks plans, and QuickBooks doesn't let you downgrade. You can always upgrade, but you can't downgrade. So I would say start off with the lowest level that you can and upgrade only if you need it, because I think I'm probably paying about $20 or $30 more than I really need to for the level of service that I have, because it's a really scary process that you have to like close down your business and export and it's just absolutely ridiculous. And I'm sure it's a money making thing, but anyway, so that's my one tip.
Good to know.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say related to finances is, I take credit cards now, and I would say that I also use an automated service. I ended up using Harvest for my billing, and I actually use that for my time tracking. I find that with my practice, I don't need a dedicated practice management service. I've tried a few, and I end up just going fine with files and folders, but I do use Harvest for billing and time tracking. My clients love it. I love it because I don't have to send out paper invoices. My clients love it because they just get the invoice and they can pay online because people are so used to doing that. And I found that my AR has gone down significantly. I mean, I'm typically getting paid in 15 days or less, and I just don't have an issue with outstanding invoices anymore.
Very cool.
So I do pay the credit card fee, but that's just kind of the cost of doing business now.
So our listeners are about to hear a replay of our original discussion. So if there's anything you want to clarify or qualify, now's the time to do it.
Oh, the one thing that I will say, I didn't realize how much time I would spend calendaring things and scheduling appointments. So I did pretty quickly sign up for the Calendly. Calendly service, which now integrates with Ruby. So I've actually moved a lot of my scheduling online. My younger clients love it. My older clients, they call Ruby, and then Ruby can schedule for me through Calendly, and that works out great as well. So, just those little hacks have been good ways to maximize my productivity.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for the update, Katie.
Yeah. Overall, it's going well. So hopefully it continues to. Check in with me in a year or so.
Will do. Glad to hear it.
My name is Katie Floyd. I'm probably well known on the internet for my podcast, Mac Power Users, and my blog over at katiefloyd.com. But during the day, I'm also an attorney. I practice primarily in the area of estate planning, guardianships, probates, and some landlord-tenant law as well.
And fair warning for listeners, we are going to geek out a little bit about Mac stuff, potentially more than just a little. But one of the reasons I'm having Katie on is because she just went out on her own and is starting her own practice. And so that's really interesting to talk about too. But Katie, maybe first, tell us a little bit more about Mac Power Users. How did you get into this while being a lawyer and practicing full time?
So that's a good question. The Mac Power Users podcast, I think, has been going on since 2009. I stopped counting the years at some point. I think 2009. David Sparks, who I know has been on your podcast in the past, and I have been good friends for a long time. And we both met in person at a Macworld back when they held Macworld. Several years ago. It was the year that the original MacBook Air was announced, is how I date it, because they had MacBook Airs suspended from the ceiling. And we had several common friends, and all of our friends got together and said, well, hey, you're an attorney and you're an attorney, and you both use and like Mac, so you guys should get together and do something.
And ironically, the podcast has nothing to do with practicing law.
No, it doesn't. So we did. It took us several months to figure out what we wanted to do. But David and I were both very interested in productivity. You've got to remember the iPhone was in its infancy at this point. There was no iPad. We were very interested in helping people use their technology to be more productive. So the title is very much aspirational. We have a lot of attorneys who do listen to our show, a lot of small business owners, a lot of people who want to use their Macs more productively. And of course, now since the iOS has become such a big part of the Apple ecosystem, we of course cover that quite a bit as well.
The name notwithstanding.
Yeah, I think if we had known that iOS was going to be such a big thing back when we launched the show, we might have named it a little differently. But it's teaching people how to use their technology in a way that helps them live their lives and get more work done, which is certainly things that are very important to David and I and to most attorneys.
And one of the things that I learned about you listening to I think the last episode of Mac Power Users was that you are not necessarily a upgrade every single time it upgrades. I think you're waiting for your brand new iPhone 7, but you're currently using an iPhone 6, which is exactly the position I'm in.
I was, except my iPhone 7 arrived yesterday.
Oh, okay. But so you don't, just because you write and talk about being a power user, part of that doesn't necessarily have to be upgrading on every moment that a new thing comes out.
That's true, because probably more than anything, some people would call it cheap. I would call it frugal.
Yep. That sounds about right for me too. Tell me about how you came to start your own practice. I mean, what were you doing before, and why wasn't it, and what you wanted to keep doing? Why did you decide to go out on your own?
So I've been working for about 10 years as an attorney now. I've been happily employed for that entire time, so I feel very fortunate. And a couple of things all came together to make the timing for this right. I'll call myself somewhat of a recovering litigator, although admittedly I do still love litigation and keeping my toe in litigation, but I don't like fighting with people all the time. So I was looking to transition a little bit out of all litigation all the time. And a couple of years ago, due to kind of a personal crisis in my own family, got exposed very directly to the world of elder law and, what happens when as family members age and things happen and they're no longer able to care for themselves, and what happens when you have a plan, what happens when things don't go according to plan, what happens with all of those end of life type things. And realize that a lot of people don't have help going down this path, or maybe they put together a plan, but when they put together a plan, they didn't anticipate how things were going. So a couple of years ago, after I'd been practicing as a litigator for many years, I decided to shift my practice a little bit and go back to school, and went back and got my LLM, and got my LLM in taxation. My particular focus was in the estate planning area of that. And because I was working full-time while I did that, it typically is a 1-year program done full-time. It took me a couple of years to complete that program, and people who've listened to Mac Power Users have kind of lived with me through that program as I've been working full-time and a part-time podcaster and part-time student. But I finished up that degree in May, and a bunch of things kind of came together, and it seemed like the right time to go out on my own. My good friend David Sparks did it about a year ago and was very helpful to me in that pursuit. I'm very fortunate that I have a fairly good base of clients that I felt that maybe I wasn't going to starve if I went out on my own.
That's helpful.
And very fortunate to be practicing in a community where I was born and raised and have been living most of my life. So had a good base of just friends and family and referral network that I'd been growing for a long time. And so far it's been going well.
That's awesome. You make it sound so casual. And I know that those of us who have started our own businesses look back and we're like, okay, I just did it. Was it a hard decision, or was it really just like, I kind of want to go out on my own. I think I'm going to try it. It
was not an easy. It was easy and it was hard in a couple of different ways. It was something that I've always been interested in doing. It was something that has always been on my radar. And like I said, the timing for a lot of things just came together to why not now. Certainly a lot of planning and preparation went into it. I am a very risk-averse type of person. And so this was something that I'd been thinking about for several years before I did it. I think if you had me back on this podcast a couple of years from now, I'll probably tell you that I wish I had done it years earlier.
I think so.
That tends to be what I hear from people.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to do it until a couple of milestones had been met, until, I knew that I had a certain amount of saving goals achieved, that I knew that I could survive for a certain period of time, even if there was no income coming in. Because again, I tend to be very risk adverse, and I know that there's certainly no guarantees in anything, but I wanted to put myself in the best possible position to be able to grow the practice slowly and the way that I wanted to, because I also wanted to be in a position where I could be very particular about the types of cases that I wanted to take. I never wanted to be a jack of all trades and a master of none, and I wanted to be comfortable, especially as a solo, to be able to say no to things, to say that's really not what I'm interested in doing, and that's really not something I'm comfortable to do.
How many months of savings did you try to get in the bank before you went out on your own? People love to ask that question before they go solo.
Without giving any specific numbers, I would say comfortably in excess of 6 months.
That's fantastic. I always tell people as many as you can, But 3 to 6 months is probably a base. Do you have a spouse who is able to help support during this, or are you kind of like you're going with no parachute other than the one that you've stitched yourself with savings?
No, just me and my own parachute here. And that was one of both the terrifying and the liberating things about it. I am single. I do not have any children at this point. So on one hand, it was a great time to be able to do that because there was nobody relying on me except me. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, it's also terrifying because there is no plan B. There is no other spouse that's working, that if things don't work out well, that there's anybody for me to rely on. There's no one else who has an employer paid, insurance policy that we can, hop on or anything like that. It's just me. And so the answer to all of my problems is me.
So I don't ask people to hand over their income statements, and I know you're a month in, but I'm curious, how are you feeling optimistic right now? Are you still in the honeymoon phase, or are you worried about when your next client is going to pay an invoice?
Well, I haven't actually sent out any of my invoices yet. As we record this, it's actually the 28th of the month.
Oh, sure.
So I'll be sending out.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm very worried about are my clients going to pay my invoices right now.
But you have some to send.
I do have some to send, and I did take a sneak peek because I can do some quick reporting, and it looks like I'll be sending out invoices that will probably be about on par with what I was making. Pretty steadily at the old job. Now, obviously, I will have to cover expenses and overhead. So,
yeah, but that's fantastic.
For month one, I think that's not too shabby.
That sounds like a win for month 3, 1 through 3 through 6 through 9 as well. So, I guess you alluded to it, but sometimes when people go solo, they have like a really well-defined philosophy of how they want to practice law, their client service model, innovations that they want to incorporate. Do you feel like you have kind of a cohesive strategy or philosophy of how you're approaching this, or are you sort of taking it slowly and seeing what emerges?
Well, I think one of the biggest reasons that I wanted to go solo is because I wanted to be able to decide how things were run in my firm. I had a lot of flexibility at some of the previous firms that I worked at, and then also none at some of the other firms that I worked at. And I wanted to be the one who was able to say, you know what, I think there's a better credit card processor that we should be using because this one offers these features and the one that we're using only offers those features. So we need to switch. I think that there's a better way of handling file management. So I think we need to switch. And I wanted to be the one who was in charge of making all those decisions. Maybe that was me being a little bit of a control freak. And when one of my complaints about some of the other firms that I've worked for, and I haven't worked for that many, is that, sometimes they would say, yeah, that's a good idea. We'll look into that. And sometimes they'll just say, there's no problems. Everything that we're doing is perfect. What could possibly be wrong? So I really liked being the controller of my own destiny, and especially kind of the Mac Power user side in me likes to be able to fiddle a little bit with the technology and decide this is the software we're going to use, this is the solutions we're going to use, this is how we're going to manage our files, this is how we're going to do those types of things. So one of the big draws for me is being able to have a cohesive experience. And I'm not sure if I'm answering the question that you asked.
No, but you were, but you also prompted me to go off on a tangent here, which is maybe a little bit closer to your Mac Power users world, which is how do you balance doing productivity, that is fiddling with your tools and trying to refine them and get them better? Because you were talking about, part of your desire was to have greater control over how things are done and the tools you use. So how do you balance your desire to optimize versus actually being productive and getting things done?
Well, that's hard because I'll tell you, when I made the decision to go solo and I told some of my law partners, some of them were terrified. They're like, are you crazy? You're going to have to figure out, how to like manage files and how to do accounting.
And you're like, I know.
Answer your phones, all that. I'm like, I know. Isn't that great? And so, as a geek and someone who enjoys some of the fiddly stuff of this, sometimes it definitely can be tempting to want to play too much with some of these systems that we've put in place, rather than actually practice law.
Yep.
So that's something that I definitely am trying to be very aware of. And so these first couple of months, especially, I tried to put some systems in place. Before we even opened the doors. September 1 was when we officially launched. The royal we, that would be me and I guess Ruby. And so I'm trying to hold to that. And if something doesn't absolutely need changing, I'm trying to stick with that probably at least through the end of the year before I make major changes and then evaluate and see where to go from there. But it is, and so far so good. I've held pretty steady to that, but it is very tempting to be fiddly.
Yeah, I have that problem too. And then, I got totally obsessed with getting things done for years. And then all of a sudden I realized that I'd been using the same set of tools for a long time. And, but also that I could switch tools with no switching time because I had a procedure that I could apply to anything. And then that was a little bit freeing when I realized I didn't have to care about my tools as much as I used to.
I mean, I guess I had a couple of overarching goals that I wanted to implement. I knew very much that I wanted to implement as much as possible a paperless practice. That was something that was very important to me. I knew that I wanted to have a practice where I could work from anywhere. I wanted to be able to work from home just as seamlessly as I could work in an office. And having an office that's very customer service oriented with estate planning, that was something that I had to have. In fact, that to this day continues to be my largest expense. Is I'm in an office share type of arrangement, but I have a very nice office because I have to meet with clients. I have to have a conference room for the type of clientele that I'm catering to. I have to have a presence, big fancy brick building with signs out front and ample parking and, books in the conference. They're not my books, but books in the conference room shelf that I go to every day. But I also wanted to, if after hours or on the weekends wanted to get work done, I didn't want to have to go to that office. So I knew that I wanted to set some things up in very specific ways that I could get work done from everywhere, that I could get work done from home, from the office, and even be as mobile as possible to the extent I could on iOS.
And I imagine you're at the point in your starting a practice journey where you will work as much as you need to get work done because you're not really all that interested in turning things down, right? But at some point you need to start, I imagine you'll find that you want to start drawing more lines. We had Kristen Lamont on recently who said that going mobile was great, but also a challenge because people felt like they were working all the time when before they could only work from their desks. And how do you think you'll balance that, the ability to work all the time with feeling like you actually have to?
Well, one of the benefits of having an office and having a dedicated office space is thus far, and again, it's only been a month, unless I had a very good reason not to, I have established pretty routine office hours. I'm typically in the office by 8 or 8:30. I'm a morning person, so I'm usually up and in there anyway. And I'm typically looking to go home around 5:30 or 6. So it's been, unless I have something that has to get done, I'm pretty much done. So I have tried to establish general office and working hours and try to make an appearance in the office. And my general philosophy has been, if you're in the office, you can kind of make things happen. And if you're, at home, working from the couch, sometimes it's a little bit easier to let things slack, at least for me. That's always been, I know it's not necessarily true for other people, but it's always been very helpful to me to get up and go in the office and do things. So that's how things have been working for me. But I agree, it's very important to have those lines. I have worked probably most weekends, but I've tried to limit that to more administrative stuff. One weekend was kind of a QuickBooks weekend. One weekend was kind of a file scanning and archiving weekend of, taking things from the old firm that they had given me in paper and digitizing them to get all that paper out of here and doing those types of things.
Very cool. So we're going to take 2 quick minutes from our sponsors. And when we come back, I want to start talking about some of the tools that you've alluded to.
Imagine what you could do with an extra 8 hours per week. You could invest in marketing your firm, you could spend more time helping clients in need, or you could catch your daughter's soccer game. That's how much time legal professionals save with Clio, the world's leading practice management software. With Clio, tracking time, billing, and matter management are fast and easy, giving you more time to focus on what really matters. And Clio is a complete practice management platform with plenty of tools and over 50 integrations to help you automate daily tasks such as document generation and court calendaring. See how the right software can make it easier to manage your practice. Try Clio for free today at Clio.com.
This podcast is supported by Ruby Receptionists. As a matter of fact, Ruby answers our phones at Lawyerist, and my firm was a paying Ruby customer before that. Here's what I love about Ruby.
When I'm in the middle of something, I hate to be interrupted, so when the phone rings, it annoys me, and that often carries over into the conversation I have after I pick up the phone, which is why I'm better off not answering my own phone. Instead, Ruby answers the phone, and if the person on the other end asks for me, a friendly, cheerful receptionist from Ruby calls me and asks if I want them to put the call through. It's a buffer that gives me a minute to let go of my annoyance and be a better human being during the call. If you want to be a better human being on the phone, give Ruby a try. Go to callruby.com/lawyerist to sign up, and Ruby will waive the $95 setup fee. If you aren't happy with Ruby for any reason, you can get your money back during your first 3 weeks. I'm pretty sure you'll stick around, but since there is no risk, you might as well try. And we're back. And Katie, you start a law practice not just as a lawyer with a decade of experience, but you have been deep in the weeds on what's available for productivity and anything else for Mac users, for iOS users, and web users, honestly. So when you start thinking about how you're putting your practice together, what kinds of tools did you adopt right away? What kinds of tools are you considering adopting soon? And I get that you're not even yet a month in, but you're well beyond a month of being a lawyer and well beyond a month of practicing productivity in law practice. And so I'm kind of curious as to how you approach that, figuring out what to get, which occupies a large part of the stress and concern of new lawyers everywhere.
Well, a lot of it was based on what did I already have. And a lot of it was obviously based on the fact that I am very Mac and iOS based. I run a podcast that's Mac Power Users. So I was not going to have a PC in my office. Though, as someone who does estate planning, as you might imagine, a lot of that software is still pretty proprietary PC-based. So although I do have a Mac Mini in my office that's my primary workstation, I'm also running Windows in Parallels, which is a virtualization software, because when I actually have to draft, I'm drafting in a PC application on that virtualized PC.
What's that software?
It's called Logic, LAWGIC.
Okay.
And I think they're more popular in Florida and a couple of areas. I don't know if they're necessarily nationwide. I think they pick a couple of states that they really hone in on. And so that's what I use for my estate planning drafting. But that's really the only thing that I boot the PC up. And at this point, it's really when I have an estate plan to draft, and then I close it back down and do all of my tweaks just using Microsoft Office. And
so I heard you mention QuickBooks earlier. You're paperless, and I imagine that means a scan snap for you.
Yes. So on the finance side, I really didn't know what to do. I have a good friend who is my personal CPA and has done my taxes for years. And so I just said, okay, so this is what I'm doing. You're going to do my business taxes. Tell me what I need. and she told me that I needed to do QuickBooks Online, and that was so that she could have access and I could have access. And so I said, fine, sign me up, whatever I need to do. So I've got a QuickBooks Online program. I was not thrilled with some of the billing implementation, so I'm using another application for billing. Right now I'm using Harvest. I don't know whether I'll continue with that, but I've been very happy with it, and it's fairly inexpensive. It's like for a solo, it's a $12 a month add-on, but it's got good implementation for time tracking and for invoicing, and it does things like being able to let you send invoices electronically, so I'm totally paperless in sending invoices out to my clients, and then they can actually pay me electronically as well. So it will tie in with a couple of payment processors, so they can pay me electronically. And I've also set up LawPay, so I can accept credit card payments. And one of the reasons I use that is because they'll keep money segregated between the trust and the operating account, which is very important because I do take retainers on matters that are money that's not earned for me. And so that's one of the ways that, because billing is huge, billing is one of the biggest paper generators in law offices, and that's one of the ways that I'm able to keep my billing completely paperless. But for the other stuff, yes, you're right. I do have a ScanSnap, Fujitsu ScanSnap IX500. I have actually two of them. I've had one on my desk at home for years and thought about taking that into the office and realized I was not willing to give it up. So just bought a second one to go in the office. I tend not to generate a lot of paper with my practice. I'm doing a lot by signing PDFs, and we are all electronic filing in Florida now. So I don't generate a lot of paper. Those things just stay on my computer in electronic format. But anytime a client gives me anything, right there in the office, I will scan it in and then typically hand the originals back to them. In fact, I've actually written that in my retainer agreements with them. I've got a section that's devoted to document and file storage and handling, where I talk to them about that I'm a paperless office, that I do not keep original documents, unless it's absolutely required for their matter, and that after so many days, after their matter's closed, that after I've made an attempt to return them, that I can discard them and those types of things. So
that's a smart thing to do. I did that in my retainers as well. It's funny, I have a ScanSnap iX500 sitting on my desk right in front of me right now too. But I was just having a conversation with Aaron, my business partner, that I almost never use it. I open it up about once a month and scan a few pieces of paper. When I had a practice, I used that more, but I generate so little paper. And once I converted all of my bills and statements and things to paperless, and once I started communicating primarily via email attachments and things like that with opposing counsel, the amount of paper that actually came in my door really dropped. I'm sure if I was practicing actively, I'd be using it more, but even still, 3-4 years ago, I wasn't generating much paper and I wasn't using my scanner very much. So even though it's like an essential tool, I feel like I can see the time when just being able to use ScanBot on my phone is all I need, which is pretty much all I use now.
Yeah, I actually use Scanner Pro on my phone.
I have that too.
Very similar app. And what that will allow you to do is take a picture of a receipt or a document. It will even OCR it, find the edges, turn it into a PDF. And I'm sure we've all received pictures of documents from clients before, and you're just going, oh, why?
Yeah.
Why did you send me this? The Harvest app actually has a nice feature where if you have a receipt, you can take a picture of it and save it to the client account. And the QuickBooks app will also do that, so you can keep track of your expenses that way.
You mentioned file storage briefly. Are you a Dropbox user, or do you use something else to sync up client files?
I am a Dropbox user. I've upgraded to Pro accounts, and I know that was a little bit controversial of, you're storing client documents in the cloud. Florida actually does have an ethics opinion on that, which basically they kind of punted a little bit and said you just have to do due diligence. So I am using an appropriate Pro type account for a business. And I definitely pay for my Dropbox storage, and I've made sure that I have all the additional security features turned on. I'm using a good password. I've got 2-factor authentication turned on. I've got notifications set so that if something else connects to my Dropbox account, it will warn me. But it's great because although I need to be very careful to say Dropbox is not backup,
right.
It is storing a copy of your file. So it is kind of a poor man or a poor woman's backup of some sort.
Well, and if you turn on the PackRat extension, it really is
Archive,
backup. Yeah.
Right. And I'm also, so that's one of the things that allows me to basically work from anywhere, because with Dropbox, my files are on my work Mac, my files are on my home Mac, and I can access them anywhere on iOS. I'm also, of course, making, local backups, and I'm also doing cloud backup as well. I'm using a service called Backblaze to back up my documents, both at work and at home. So there's really, if anything happens, I'm pretty well covered.
My new favorite thing about the ScanSnap actually is with the last update, or the previous to last update, the ScanSnap Cloud option. I've unplugged my scanner from my computer, and now I just run paper through it directly, and it just goes straight to Dropbox, and I don't even have to worry about it, which I love.
Yeah.
And then what kind of, it doesn't sound like you're using practice management software yet.
I am not at this point. One of the philosophies that I went into this is, like I said, I'm fairly frugal, and one of my concerns was anything that I went into this practice with on day one was going to be very hard to get rid of. So I wanted to go in as lean as possible, knowing that it would be much easier to add than it would be to get rid of. So I'm not using any practice management at this point. I'm using files and folders. Now I'm using some third-party utilities on the Mac to help me organize those things. There's a great extension, a system preference on the Mac called Hazel that will allow you to automatically rename and file things. And we've done several Mac Power Users episodes on Hazel. And so I have a lot of Hazel actions invoked to help me keep files organized and things like that. But at this point, no, it's just files and folders. At some point, I might consider adding practice management, but I don't really feel like I want to do that until I've probably been doing this for at least 6 months because I want to be able to make an informed and educated decision of exactly what do I need, what features am I lacking, and what exactly am I going to use a practice management system for?
That is such a good perspective. So many lawyers think they need practice management software and go shopping for it when they don't have a clear idea of what need they will be meeting with it. And that becomes a problem when, like, if you're an Outlook user, maybe that meets your needs and you don't need to be looking at practice management software.
And again, you said, so much as an email. I'm using a Gmail for work account. So that's more than archiving everything that I'm using. I'm also using a third-party plugin for Apple Mail called Mail Tags, and I've set up a couple specific rules. So every time I open a new client matter, it will look at a couple of keywords, who's the message to, or who's it from, or is a couple of words in the subject matter, and it's tagging my mail automatically for me. This must be related to the Smith v. Jones matter. So it's tagging, is another factor to help tag my mail.
You mentioned Hazel real quick, and I want to include links to the episodes of Mac Power Users so that people can go see some examples. Here's some examples of how to use it and what to use it for. But can you give us a couple examples? Because I know that it's actually worth giving an example of how you can use it, because it is such a powerful program.
Well, and I should mention the best way to see what Hazel does is actually watch it in action. And
sure.
David Sparks has done a couple of field guides or a couple of video tutorials on Hazel. I think he's actually done a video field guide on Hazel, so you can actually watch what it does. But Hazel, what it will do is it will watch your files. And, if you've scanned everything in with your fancy ScanSnap or your scanner on your phone that has the ability to OCR, and what that means is optical character recognition. So to be able to pick out the words and see the words in your files, Hazel has the ability to now read the data in like PDF files. And of course, lawyers work and live and breathe in PDFs. So you can set up specific Hazel rules based on criteria and files. So, here's a very simple one for just categorizing expenses. You mentioned Ruby. Every month I get a bill from Ruby, and that file has a couple of key characteristics in it. It has my account number. It has Ruby receptionist in it somewhere. So when I download that file from I think it's emailed to me, that PDF invoice. When I download that from my email application it goes to my downloads folder, but it's named something weird. Mm-hmm. So Hazel looks at that file. It sees that criteria that I've set up. Think of it like a series of if-then statements. So if this criteria is met, if you see this criteria in this specific file, then do these things. And what I have Hazel do is rename that file consistent with my file naming system. And that's something that I think is very important, especially if you don't have practice management software, to have a consistent way that you name and organize your files, and to file it in a particular folder. So it's going to file it in my business receipts folder under this category. And those are documents that I share with my accountant so that I know when my accountant is balancing my books for the quarter, she's going to have access to that receipt. And so I do that with a lot of my ongoing monthly business expenses. And then I also have similar categories set up every time that, I open a new client matter. Hazel's going to create a subset of folders, and, certain things that have certain criteria, like if it has a particular case number in it, those are all have, if you're looking for a particular thing with a particular case number, it's going to file it in that client folder.
That is super useful. I always had a manual system for copying over my file templates, and I was always accidentally moving instead of copying, and it would be so easy to just grab something like that and make it happen automatically. So Katie, maybe let's close with one of my favorite things to do with tech-forward lawyers, which is talking about some of your must-have apps. You've mentioned some of the services you're using, but what are the things on your phone, on your Mac, on your watch, if you have an Apple Watch, that you just can't imagine yourself living without, whether or not they have to do with your law practice?
Well, I'll try to give you things that are more productivity focused. A couple of things. Obviously, all attorneys have to deal with calendaring. So the app that I use for calendaring is one called Fantastical. It's available both for the Mac and iOS. One of the things that I like about it is, in addition to it being a full-fledged calendar, is it has great natural language support. So I can write things in my calendar like record podcast with Sam Wednesday at 5:30, and it will automatically create a calendar entry for Wednesday at 5:30 titled Record Podcast with Sam. Mm-hmm. And that also works well with dictation. So it's just probably one of the best calendaring applications that I've used. So that's Fantastical. Another one that I really think all attorneys can be using, and it's one that I recommend a lot for my clients in my estate planning practice, is a password manager app. My personal preference is one called 1Password. I think LastPass is probably pretty good as well. But, we all know the horror stories of data breaches and what happens when your information gets compromised. And the reality is it will happen, and it probably won't be your fault. It will probably be someone else who gets their data compromised, and you just happen to be an innocent bystander. But there's only so much you can do to protect yourself. But the single most important thing you can do is to have strong, unique passwords across all of your sites. And it's a real pain to do that unless you're using a password manager. So just to have that information stored somewhere else, what 1Password does is it lets you store that information. It will randomly generate passwords. It will automatically log you in. And one of the reasons that I like recommending something like this for my estate planning clients is, what is your plan? If you become incapacitated or in the event when you die, how is someone going to gain access to all of your digital assets? So much of our life is online now. How are they going to access your online banking accounts or your, even just your email and those types of things? So I typically tell them as part of a comprehensive estate plan, you also have to figure out how to plan for those digital assets as well. And so if you're using something like a password manager, that's just one thing that you have to keep updated, and then provide instructions on how to access that, and then your fiduciary is covered.
So how do you, I know this is a digression, but that's a pretty interesting issue. How do you advise people to do that? Do you tell them to use my wife and I have a shared password. We use Dashlane. I use Dashlane. She knows that. We have a shared password. Dashlane also has a dead man switch, which is nice. If I don't use it for 2 weeks, it'll automatically email her and let her know that I haven't logged in and ask her if she wants to, or it's something like that. I know people keep half the password in a safe deposit box and give the other half to their spouse or someone they trust. Do you have a preferred way that you tell people to do it?
I think that's a conversation you have to have with the client on a case-by-case basis based on what their comfort level is, the type of assets that you're talking about, and who the potential fiduciaries are, because everyone's circumstances are certainly different. And obviously what their comfort level is with technology. What I personally do, and what I think might be right for certain people, is, I'm comfortable. I keep all of my stuff in 1Password. I keep it updated. And then I have what I call an emergency kit, and it's not mine. I lay no claim to it. I think Mike Vardy might have come up with this, and I actually blogged about it on my law site. And it's basically a one-page sheet with information that just basically says, hi, this is the password manager that I use. This is how you access it. And by the way, if you need to get into my computer, this is the password to get in my computer, because you're going to need a couple of bits of information just to get access to the password manager. So it's just kind of, and then I think it also has, and if this makes no sense to you, and if you need help, here's the name of two of my techie friends who can help walk you through this.
That is super smart. I'm going to include that link. Any other must-have apps?
Oh, I've got a ton of must-have apps.
I'm sure you have a long list. Give me 2 or 3 more.
Give you 2 or 3 more. OmniFocus is my to-do application of choice, and to call it a to-do application is really an abomination. It's really an entire GTD system. GTD is obviously the getting things done methodology. Mm-hmm. It's based on a book written by David Allen many, many years ago that has since been revised and updated. But it's kind of my external brain. It's where I store everything that I have to do today, tomorrow, 10 years from now. One of the things I noticed is 10 years ago, I put a note in here to renew my passport, and it's just come up due. So it's interesting that I'm using the same GTD application now that I was using 10 years ago. So
that's amazing.
So it works.
And I know a lot of lawyers use OmniFocus in place of a practice management software. I think David Sparks basically uses it for his practice management software.
Well, and that's some of what I've done too, because it's great for calendaring, it's great for follow-up, it's great for making sure that you can note your deadlines. So there's that. The other thing, and mine is pretty unique. I use a product called Zoltis and Mixi, but I think having a basic VoIP phone solution is a good solution. And find the one obviously that works best for you. Some people like Ring Central, some people like Vonage. I went with mine because basically a longtime business associate and client of mine, happens to run a telecommunications company and it worked out well for me. But having the ability to make and return calls from anywhere, again, kind of goes with that overarching philosophy of I want to be able to run my law practice from anywhere. I want to be able to run it from the office if I'm there, where I have a dedicated phone on my desk. But I also want to be able to return calls from my cell phone, from my iPhone, without people knowing that I'm sitting at home.
And so you have a separate business phone number, and that's what you use that for?
Yeah, I have a separate business phone number. I have a separate business phone. It's sitting on my desk, but it also has a VoIP component that has an app on my cell phone that if I'm not in the office, I can dial through that app on my phone and I can make and receive calls from my cell phone as though I were on the other phone. And I think Ruby can do this to some degree as well. I happen to go through a different provider for that. For example, this might be kind of scary for someone who's opening a new solo practice, and I'm a little nervous about it, but it was a pre-planned trip. I'm taking 2 weeks off in April. My family and I are going to Amsterdam and Holland and Belgium for 2 weeks to go see the tulips. So I'm still going to have to do some work. I can't take completely 2 weeks off without having any access to work. But I'll be able to e-file, I'll be able to email, I'll be able to make calls, I'll be able to do all of that just by taking my laptop and my cell phone.
Very cool. Before I say thank you and close, is there anything you wanted us to talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
I think the overarching theme of my new solo practice and the way that I'm able to sleep at night is I've tried very hard to keep things simple. I can always add later. I think being somewhat frugal and being somewhat prepared for this has, by having savings and by starting off slow, I mean, that's been how I've started. That's how I've always been comfortable doing things. I think taking things slowly and building them up from there, hopefully will serve me well. Today I probably backed off of a client that if I were in a different position, I might have taken, but it was kind of one of those things in the back of your head, this isn't going to turn out well and I'm going to regret this if I end up taking it. So why don't I just not take it to begin with?
One of my favorite posts on our site is the clients you don't take will be the best money you never made.
Exactly. And that's absolutely true. I think one of the best pieces of advice that a judge gave me once is the best decision you'll ever make is to fire a client.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So I think going slow and kind of coming at this from hopefully a position of strength. And I think it's at least what gives me some comfort in this solo journey.
Well, for what it's worth, from somebody who had been there and done that, I think you've got the right approach. And I really appreciate you being with us and talking about your practice while it's still in its birthing phase, I guess. It feels like it's in the process of becoming, and it's really cool to get a window into how that's happening. So thank you so much for being with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
Make sure to catch next week's episode of the Lawyerist Podcast. If you'd like more information about today's show, please visit lawyerist.com/podcast or legaltalknetwork.com. You can subscribe via iTunes or anywhere podcasts are found. Both Lawyerist and the Legal Talk Network can be found on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and you can download the free app from Legal Talk Network in Google Play or iTunes.
The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by Legal Talk Network. Nothing said during this podcast is legal advice.